Hello and welcome to Newsmakers for this Wednesday, October 16, 2024. I'm Louie Butko and thank you for joining us. On today's show, I'm very pleased to be joined by the Hamilton Spectator's Jon Wells. A native of Montreal, Wells graduated from Carleton University with a master's degree in journalism and quickly made a name for himself on the crime beat and in true crime research. His reporting has won 4 National Newspaper Awards, 23 Ontario Newspaper Awards, including Journalist of the Year for his series Sniper on anti-abortion killer James Kopp. In addition, he has written 7 books, including Postmortem, which was shortlisted for an Arthur Ellis Award for Best Crime Nonfiction. Quite the resume, Jon Wells. What is it about true crime for you that you seem to thrive on, but that you've made your career out of?
It just seems to keep finding me, Louie, in a sense. I mean, when I first came to Hamilton from Guelph, I worked for a weekly paper in Guelph called the Tribune, and I remember my editor there saying, Johnny, in Hamilton, you're going to be an ambulance chaser. It's going to be all crime all the time. And I was kind of like, what are you talking about? I hadn't really even thought about that. And, after the big first one, Poison, many years ago, one thing sort of led to the other. And I guess in the end, in terms of human drama, pain and redemption and good and evil and all of that. I mean, crime has all of that, and I don't enter into these stories lightly because they're in terms of the victims and families and all that sort of thing. But it's certainly been interesting to get to know different people, from the investigators to victims and their families, and write these pieces and look for bits of light in the darkness, kind of thing.
The one thing reviewing a couple of your stories, reading, skimming through a few of your books in preparation of this, even in your stories, like even if it's a 900-word article in the Spectator, your research is, like I said, it's top notch. What is it about that, the research part of it, the digging, the asking questions, the going through boxes of files that you enjoy, or is it just what you do?
I think the research, for me, I sort of think of myself as a writer, and I enjoy the writing process. But since we're in the business of nonfiction, I need to gather my material. I need fuel to drive the narrative, kind of thing. So for me, the research is the legwork required to give me the color, the detail, the voices, the scenes to tell the story properly or with authority. And so I think earlier in my career, I maybe sort of approached the research with some sense of drudgery, like, now I have to do the reporting before I can actually write. And now I look forward to finding things that can be frustrating when you're trying to peel back the layers on a story, and you're struggling to get that information, to get that detail, to tell it with authority, kind of thing. But that's in the end, it can be gratifying.
I was just about to say, do you get that eureka moment? Like, do you get that one page of a turn, the one highlight? Like, is there that moment where it all comes together for you?
I think oftentimes it's thinking of getting to a point where I feel like, okay, this is my way into the story. This is my hook. This is the scene that will do it. Sometimes it's after visiting with someone who I've interviewed, and I've been somewhere and I've felt something, and you're feeling that emotion, like, okay, this is the story. That's the crux of it. And the rest is just putting clothes on the mannequin. The rest is just dressing up the rest of the story. But I've got my hook. Yeah.
And the reason I got you in here this week was there was a story a few weeks ago. There was a really well-written piece, Unclaimed, and you talk about the hook. The first 2 lines there got me. No one knew the deceased, not the 5 figures in black who stood next to the open grave and the mound of fresh earth, or the cemetery workers with shovels and backhoe. In a biting April wind and harsh glare of mid-afternoon sun against an infinite blue sky, a man from the funeral home said a few words, as a pastor might. It's an incredible piece. I asked you before, this was just a pitch from your editor. Yep. It turned into so much more than that, though, didn't it?
It did. My editor, Cheryl Steppen, had suggested I do a piece on the issue of Unclaimed. She'd been reading about it as being an issue in New York. Was the genesis of it. And she said, well, let's look into it locally, kind of thing. And over time, She first pitched this like a year ago, so I didn't really get anywhere with it. I was going through the city trying to get information, and I wanted to see from the start if I could retrace the life of an unclaimed deceased. But because of privacy issues, the city kept telling me, and so on, I couldn't seem to get a funeral home either to help me. And it just kept evolving. You talk about peeling back the layers. I mean, I could have done a story months and months ago about just the issue, the numbers, the trend. That would have been interesting. Get some quotes from various people. But I wanted that human piece to it, the life and the death part of it. And once I got an opportunity to attend a funeral of a deceased, an unclaimed deceased, that was that eureka moment where I'm like, okay, this is the story, and this is the color, and this is the opening scene, as you just wrote there. Yeah.
Well, and the one thing about this story, you put yourself into it. I'm sure not by choice, but through the process of finding out about this person, you were invited to be a pallbearer. As a journalist, I have to imagine it was a choice for you, a difficult choice, to have researched all this, and then to put yourself in the story. What was that process like? Was there do I do this? Do I include this part? Because we journalists sometimes don't want to put ourselves in the story.
It's a great point, great question. I always hesitate in my pieces, my long pieces, in going first person and inserting myself in the story that way. And in some recent features, I did a big piece on a hitman a couple of years ago, and now this Unclaimed. My editors have urged me to put myself in the story, And I mean, I think sometimes going first person is the best way to tell a story, and many times, usually, it's not the best way. But in this case, I felt it was. Once I got the invitation to attend the funeral and to be a pallbearer, which I hadn't been expecting that. I didn't ask that. I wasn't like, oh, can I be a pallbearer, please? The funeral home director, Julie Brown, suggested that. And on the phone, I was like, I sort of paused, and she's like, John, we're all human. And I was like, yeah, I feel a bit of discomfort. I'm thinking to myself, but no, this will be good for the story. Is the phrase I thought of, and I wasn't sure how that would manifest itself in the telling of the story. But once I was there, and in my earlier drafts, I still didn't use first person. I was just sort of describing it as an eye on the scene. But my editor suggested, go first person to let the reader know this is you. You're the pallbearer right from the start. I was going to reveal that sort of at the end, and it's a long piece, so that I kind of reveal it at the very start. And it becomes there's different layers to that story. There's the issue part of the story that I tell, and then there's the narrative of the unclaimed deceased, Bob Nelligan. And my experience with that. And so I sort of open with that. We go to the issue. We come back to Bob, and then we close it with the casket being lowered into the earth. And that sort of provides a closure to the story and to Bob's life.
The retelling of it, like you said, because it was just it was a simple 2-line death notice, right? And you included that in the story. And it became so much more than that in the telling of Bob Nelligan. Yeah,
and that was talking about investigating research, the eureka moment where I heard his name when we were at the funeral, at the burial. And so I had a name. I saw the death. I found the death notice. No information other than his name. And so then from there, I knew nothing about him. I was Googling, I was Facebooking. I couldn't find anything about this guy. He died. He had no Facebook account. I couldn't find family. It was only by going through some old city directories that I found an address for where he lived. I called a couple of places. Ultimately, I got this woman on the phone who was his widow. They were divorced years ago, but she had been married to him. And that was the moment I thought, wow. And then Sandra, I quote her in the story. She was wonderful. She was very open, very honest. And I went from having sort of threads of a story and threads of his life and little bits and pieces of the picture to really sort of coloring in the whole picture the more I talked to family. And that was, that was gratifying. I mean, it's a sad story, and I felt guilty in a sense, talking to family and asking them about it. I thought at some point maybe a family member would sort of get angry with me or like, hey, why are you doing the story? The kind of thing. But they weren't like that at all. They were very open. It highlighted to me how life is complicated. There's lots of gray area, and that's all part of the story too.
Yeah. Well, even you talked to Jay, and you talked about the feelings he had afterwards and how he felt rushed by the decision, once he heard from the coroner that we can take care of this for you if it's something. And then he sort of felt like he regretted that decision. Yeah. I'm sure this article gave him a lot of peace, but when you write something like this, how long does it stick with you? Like, I mean, a lot of your stories are these very personal retellings of very tragic events. Like, how long do these stories stick with you? Forever?
I think that they always do. Certain ones more than others. I mean, you mentioned, Sniper, the anti-abortion killer James Kopp off the top, and that one sticks with me. But at the same time, I sort of don't let it because that's a dark piece. But a story like Heat, a book I wrote years ago on the Plastimet fire and Bob Shaw, that sticks with me in a good way in terms of the family and my experience from that. This one certainly will stick with me for a long time. And when the story first comes out, as with Unclaimed, a very sensitive story where family have opened up to me, there's that the fear I have when it first comes out that I hope they're okay with it. You know what I mean? They opened up to me. I'm pretty good at trying to make sure that I know what they're comfortable with I'm going to write kind of thing, more or less. But there's always that sort of terror when the story comes out. I often think how I'm happiest when I've written the story and I'm happy with what I've written, and my editor likes it. I may have shown a draft to my mom, and people like it, and I'm like, oh, this is good. But then it has to come out, and I'm like, other people to read it, kind of thing. And but once I get over that initial sort of hump, and if the families express some satisfaction with what I've done, or even in some cases thanking me, depending on the story, that feels really good. Yeah. If I have not contributed to anyone's pain, in fact, if I've even helped in some way, that's a great feeling. And then. But the whole experience of being at the funeral and all that, and those are experiences that stay with you, and it's a great part of the job, and it's a rewarding part of the job. That it's the intangible of why we do what we do.
There's a great trust in being able to tell people's stories. Was that a skill that you had to get people to trust you? What is that conversation like to get these people to talk about their darkest moments and their most tragic events?
It's. I've been told on occasion I'll be interviewing someone and they're kind of spilling their guts, and they're like, "Oh, I've never sort of told anyone this before," or I'm surprised how much I'm telling you. I have a crime story coming out in a couple of weeks where the woman, she was in tears and she's like, "Oh, I can't believe how much I'm going on here." And I say, "Yeah, I'm surprised," and so I don't know why. I don't know if that's something you just develop over time in terms of relating to people and letting them talk. I mean, my approach is to never try to force myself on someone and say, you better talk. I mean, I need you. I kind of open the door and let them walk in or leave. Because in the end, I figure if they're not comfortable with talking to me, I don't want them to do what they don't want to do. And maybe that comes across. I don't know. My dad was a career salesman, and he was good at what he did. So, in a sense, we're trying to sell ourselves in terms of our trust, and to the people we interview, and you hope that they want to trust you and open up to you, and that in some way they might find it cathartic. They might appreciate the process themselves.
Well put. I want to go back to the Unclaimed series because, like you said, it was a story that I think opened my eyes to this issue, and I bolded this number here. 2008, the number of unclaimed bodies in the province that year was 130, according to data from the Ontario Office of the Chief Coroners. In 2023, 15 years, that total was 1,183, an increase of more than ninefold over 15 years. We were saying, as we were walking here, an increase of ninefold in any category is meteorology, that is through the roof, right? That number is almost scary when you look at it.
Yeah, I was flabbergasted. I had no idea that's what the statistic would show. And one of those areas where somebody do a story on you do a trend story or a numbers piece, and people have some hard and fast answers, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, well, because the reason is this, and it's this and this, and no one has a real solid answer as to exactly why that's happening. The chief coroner who I interviewed just lamented it, said he wasn't sure. He talked about people living more in isolation now than they used to, and certainly that's got to be part of it. And people who aren't generations ago, if someone had mental illness or so on, or they were they were living in a family home, but they were never sort of abandoned, and there's more of that now. And then in terms of financial pressures on people, and the role of religion, faith in the culture, I think, in terms of the sanctity of the dead, in terms of how we see that, and because there's different traditions for what we do with the deceased all around the world in different cultures, and so that keeps changing too. But no, I saw the numbers. Like, what? I swear I went over the math on that like 20 times. I kept thinking maybe there was a mistake with that. But
there's a comma missing somewhere.
Yeah. No, exactly.
So it's incredible, and it was a great story, and it's the reason we brought you on here today. So thanks for diving into it. But you did catch my eye recently with another story, and that is on Kimberley Polman, a Hamilton-raised woman who went into ISIL. She's currently on trial in BC. Tell me a little bit more about Kimberley Polman and her story.
Yeah, so I mean that broke. I've written about her now like several times over the last few years. That when it became it sort of became national news that Canada had Canadians in this refugee camp in Syria trying to be repatriated back to Canada, and Kimberley Polman was one of them. And the New York Times first reported this story, and they're the ones who first reported on Kimberley and said she was from Hamilton. So, I mean, this must have been 3 or 4 years ago. I can't remember. It was quite a while ago where the editor came to me and said, she's from Hamilton. Let's do a story on her and find out what we can. I could barely find out anything about her or even confirm she was from Hamilton. And so I've done little update stories over the years. There was a documentary done on the ISIL brides, as they call them, or ISIS brides. And so I found a little bit more through the documentary a couple of years ago. And but this most recent thing, in the summertime, she's back in Canada, Kim Polman, and she was for the first time formally charged with terrorism offenses. So that gave this story a new news peg to write a piece. So I did a brief story in July about these charges. And then started kind of trying to peel back the layers to find out more about her. And again, going through the city directories and finding some of her family out in BC, through Facebook and other avenues. Just kind of kept going down the rabbit hole. And so I did this piece that's sort of essentially kind of updating what I was able to find out about her and her family past. And her father went to medical school at McMaster, and they lived in the mountain. And so, it's one of these things where that's a case where I did a ton of research. It took me a long time. I got in touch with 2 of her family members, so I don't name, but I got in touch to verify certain facts that I felt were true, but I needed the verification. So it sort of took forever to get some facts that I could essentially write a few sentences about some of these facts. But sometimes that's what you have to do. So I felt like I had to go, sort of run for miles on that just to get a little bit written on that. But in the end, it's and then got the court document about what the RCMP alleges about what she did there, and how she became radicalized. And so I was able to kind of weave that into the story as well. And it turned into a much sort of longer piece than I had planned. But it's quite interesting.
No, absolutely. I encourage everybody to check it out. I think it was in the paper this week. I read it online. The weekend. And you also talked to Anne Speckhart, who is she's the director of the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism. She had when you read about this woman and everything she had been through, it's pretty interesting to see what she's saying compared to what the RCMP are alleging.
It's true, and it goes again to my, there are gray areas, and life is complicated, and so you look at Kim Polman. I try not to look at too much, but I took a quick peek at some of the comments online to the story, and most of them were people basically piling on saying, send her back to Syria. That's not going to happen. She's a Canadian citizen. But there's a lot to it, and Anne, who I interviewed, she was quoted in the RCMP document. I didn't mention that story, but she was one of the ones who was quoted in terms of some of her interview she did with Kimberley Polman in Syria, and I thought Anne brought some balance to the story in terms, I mean, I think with all my journalism over the years, I come to the conclusion that everyone's got a story, everyone has a road traveled, and things that happen that lead to other things. You know what I mean? And with Kimberley Polman, Anne certainly suggested that she had a lot of trauma in her life growing up, and violence in her life, and other issues that sort of led her down a certain path. Not to excuse one's choices, but it helps, I think, to help account for certain things anyway.
Yeah. How long have you been at the Spec?
Oh, goodness. 26 years, I think.
26 years.
Long time.
How has crime reporting changed in that time?
I think the day to day. I mean, when I started at the Spectator, we had several crime reporters. Or a few of them at least. It was all they did. They carried police scanners around. They're like for the youth at home. They're like walkie talkies. That's also an old reference. They're like little radios you're carrying around.
Walkie talkies. It might be the first time the word walkie talkies has been said on this show. But.
So these radios, they would be tuned to the police channel, and it would be having calls that police were reporting to. We don't have those anymore, kind of thing. And so the cop reporters, as we call them, would be on that beat every day doing things. And I never actually covered the police beat. I was doing sort of more of the feature-y type stuff. So that's why I think it's changed. It's certainly that way in terms of the day to day, and maybe also dealing with police officers. I mean, I've been fortunate with to interview police officers who are active or retired who are relatively open with me in terms of helping to give me information and share information and be interviewed. But I think 25 years ago, you could sort of go down to the station and kick back with a detective, and they tell you some stuff off the record. There's a fair bit of trust, and now it's a little more it's more corporate. You have to go through channels and all that sort of thing, and so it becomes more difficult. I mean, some of my earlier crime series from 15 years ago, I had a homicide detective once. He gave me his whole investigative notebook because he trusted that I would not misuse it, and it worked out well. But it's unthinkable that would probably happen today. So times have changed that way. But in terms of the pain that people suffer from crime, nothing has changed.
Yeah, I mean, because that was it, and I feel like there's always going to be an avenue for crime reporting, just because it's always happening. Where can you go from here? Like you say, you got your features, you do your day-to-day stuff. Where do you hope to go from here?
I just keep telling, as you say, in a sense, the stories stay the same. People are encountering life and death situations and challenges in life, trying to overcome odds. I grew up when I was in university. I wanted to be a sports reporter. That's where I cut my teeth as a journalist at Western, and I think it was a good training ground for me in terms of in sports. There's a winner, there's a loser. It's self-contained narrative every single time, and in life, while it's more serious. That's all part of the human experience. Is encountering difficulties, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes the losses are massive. So it's just always trying to find new stories, new people to write about, and no matter what story I get assigned or suggest. It could be the smallest a little story, but there's always drama within that, and big life stories to be told from those. So there's always going to be material, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Kim Polman. The one thing you said there is you kind of broke a rule where you read the comments. You wanted to see what people.
Yeah.
That I find there's a lot of toxicity in what we do these days, and that even the most straightforward, narrow, mostly one-sided story can trigger a reaction in a viewer, a listener, that as the person writing the story or telling the story, you can't even anticipate. How has that changed in the internet and comments? And I mean, true crime is a little more straightforward, I would think, but still, I have to assume that the internet commenting people out there in the sphere have made it different.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I still, in terms of feedback I'll get on a story, I'll receive, emails from readers. And it's interesting how, emails are probably almost like, snail mail letters, that is handwritten letters would have been, 20 years ago. They tend to be more thoughtful. People are using their actual name. So there's accountability there if they're going to write you. And they tend to be more positive. You get the odd negative one kind of thing. But whereas the online commenting, where it's anonymous for the most part, it brings out sometimes the harsher instincts in people, because they can just kind of say whatever comes to mind off the cuff, intrusive thoughts as they were, and so that's why I like to avoid looking at it to a great extent. Maybe just sort of look at the comments to see what is the gist, what's the thrust of the comments that are out there. So that with the Polman thing, I say okay, I get it. I don't need to read through all the stuff, but yeah, there's just a lot of negativity, and And certainly, I've been pretty fortunate to not encounter much of this, but I've had colleagues who have had, threats and really sort of nasty things, and it doesn't speak well of humanity sometimes. And maybe that's the human animal has always been like that, but just haven't had the outlet to express it to people, and now there is that. And I suppose it could cause younger people not to want to get into the business, and people have left, I think, as a result of some of that. And like I say, when the story of mine comes out, there's always sort of that bit of fear, like, oh, am I going to get some blowback? Is someone going to be angry with me? Did I get something wrong? Will someone think it's one-sided? But you have to just kind of, we have editors. We try to do our best and be as balanced as we can, and be as objective as we can. And I know in our newsroom we strive for that. And no one can ever achieve perfect balance, but we try, and that's all you can do.
So on that note, on the negativity and writing about true crime, give me something you're optimistic about in what we do and what journalists can have the ability to do.
Well, I am optimistic. I think, when I talk about feedback, for the Unclaimed story, I received, perhaps 25 emails from people. I got that, which is a fair bit of email, and I'm optimistic when I read feedback from people on how carefully they're reading the stories and how thoughtful they are, and how there's an appetite for good storytelling and human stories. That the cynic might say, oh, people just want to have the listings of what the latest streamed shows are on Netflix or something. Let's just publish that, or you know what I mean, or and have there's a low regard for the audience kind of thing. But I think I'm optimistic about how much appetite there is for good storytelling and for solid journalism and for finding things out, and in an age where people consume so much media on social media, Facebook, social media, X, and various things, and it's. It could be a negative thing, the whole echo chamber effect. People are just looking to have their own opinions corroborated and so on. But I also think there also is a critical mass of people out there who want balanced information and solid journalism and storytelling about the human drama. And so I'm optimistic that, the Spec, we're still kicking and doing great work. CH, there's still a lot of great journalism being done out there, and still consumers out there who want to pay for that, and we have some younger reporters in our newsroom who are really go-getters, and they love the craft too. So there's plenty of I started the business like 25 years ago. I remember a friend of my dad's saying, "Oh, Doug," to my dad, he's like, "Oh, John, he newspapers. That's a dead industry." And I know there's a kernel of truth in terms of the changes and decline in terms of circulation, but I'm still here. The Spec's still here, and I'm still enjoying it.
Yeah, so. You mentioned the Spec, you mentioned solid journalism, and of course all those words come to mind. And we were talking, the changes that have happened. It's not the hustle bustle of a newsroom anymore. But the team that you work with, and you touched on it there, the up and comings, the Fallon Hewitts, the people who've been there forever, Nicole Riley.
Yes.
What makes that team special, despite all the challenges that have happened? You're still putting out a daily paper. You're still getting to do long form research articles. What makes that team at the Spec special?
I think there's still a great collegiality to the team we have, and whether it's meeting on Zoom or getting together in person on occasion to work together like we still do on occasion, even though we don't have a bricks and mortar kind of building. To me, it speaks to that a news team and a team of any kind is more than a facility, and it's about just sort of shared values and professional values that our group has. And you mentioned Nicole and Fallon and Kate and everyone else. There's these are journalists who have been have gone to journalism school and have been educated and take the craft very seriously and are fun people, and then the leadership from the top. Cheryl Steppen, our editor in chief, is a fantastic leader and inspires, I think, us to want to do our best kind of thing, and so no, it's a great team. It's still a fun group, and everyone's always really striving to do their best, and still take great pride in writing under the Spectator banner. I really believe that, and that's an intangible, and that's just something that's still there.
And the results are right there in black and white and color, I guess we can say now, in the Spectator and what you guys do. John, I really appreciate making the time. A couple of great pieces to get to highlight with you. I'm going to have you back soon. You said you were working on something, so I'm going to have you back after that.
That sounds good, Louie.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
All right, my thanks to Jon Wells for joining me today, and my thanks to you because we could not do the show without your support. My thanks to Justin Peeler for directing today's episode. And hey, while you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to CHCH Podcast so you never miss an episode of this show or any of the other great shows we have for you, including Sportsline with Bubba O'Neill, which you can catch Monday to Friday right here on CHCH Podcast. One more time, thank you for watching us from all of us here at CHCH. I'm Louie Butko. Have a great day.